Extremists aren't created overnight. The slow process of radicalization can slowly erode one's attachment to truth. From first contact to joining extremist groups to what real-world damage these ideologies can inflict, this video will take a look at the entire radicalization process. And in order to really get to the heart of this issue, we need some context. My name is Joseph, and this is the Atlanta Journal-Constitution in Context. Now, before we dissect the radicalization process, we need a definition. Quote, associated with political views, practices, and policies of extreme change, and quote, advocating extreme measures to retain or restore a political state of affairs. Now, these are people who see extreme political views as justified. Now, that's not inherently bad. Change is often welcome. But the more radicalized you are, the more justification you will give to extreme political views, practices, and policies. And while I think those definitions are good, I wanted to get at something with a bit more nuance. So I asked an investigative researcher at the Anti-Defamation League's Center on Extremism how she would define radicalization. And she told me,
so radicalization is the process of an individual who is exposed to a belief system or an extremist ideology, ingraining themselves and taking on elements of that belief system. So when we talk in the terms of the way extremists define themselves, the concept of red pilling, or when an individual makes their first point of contact with a belief system or a conspiracy, that is their first step in the direction, in many cases, of a rabbit hole, where they become more and more exposed to elements of hate or the belief systems of whatever group or ideology they're around, and it can in many cases lead to an increased rhetoric. In terms of when we're talking about violent extremism, someone can go from being exposed to a hateful conspiracy to being exposed to so much more content that towards the end of their radicalization trajectory, they feel as if violent action or violent rhetoric is justified or necessary because of how deeply ingrained they have become with the beliefs and the tactics of a specific ideology or movement.
Now that definition is great because it really emphasizes that radicalization is a process. The concept of red pilling is extremely important as well. Side note, red pilling is a term that comes from the Matrix movies. If you take this red pill, the saying goes, your eyes will open up and you can finally see the world for what it truly is. Think of it as an aha moment, but for extremist ideology. But how do these groups know who will take the red pill? That's a question I asked my colleague, Chris Joyner, who covers extremism for our publication, and he gave me this example.
If you're in a room and you tell a Hitler joke and 99% of the people, blanch and are like, they can't believe that you did that, but one person giggles. Well, that's the one person you want. You don't care about the other 99.
Now, that quote perfectly illustrates how integral the internet and meme culture are to this process. No matter what corner of the internet you're on, whether it be Twitter, YouTube, Reddit, etc., these memes and jokes are ever present. This is especially pernicious because memes in general are relatively innocuous. I mean, there was a time where Pepe the Frog was not synonymous with the alt-right. During this time, someone could see that and think, LOL, look at this frog meme. Not, am I seeing alt-right propaganda? And on top of that, social media is optimized to show you more of what you click on. The internet is a mirror, not a window. Then people start building communities around these jokes. Or as Chris says,
Facebook was really just sort of like the perfect arena for this, because you could form friendships with people you didn't really know in real life. You could reach out to them and you could form groups that were private or public.
So when people are inculcated in these online communities, the jokes slowly stop becoming jokes. Like Amy says,
point where memes are not always explicitly hateful or white supremacist, and someone can come into contact with something that at the most basic level might be funny or might expose them to something that then through their progression becomes more and more targeted or more and more extreme, or starts to advocate for more concerning behavior the further they go from that first original meme or propaganda touch point.
Next, I think it's important to understand what is animating these people. What stories are they telling themselves to make themselves the hero? What forces in their mind need to be fought against in such a drastic manner? When I asked Amy these questions, she told me,
I think that's a great question. I think there are a lot of different things that can play into both an individual's trajectory in radicalization, but also a group of people. But I think whether you eliminate socio and economic and political and other things, I think one of the most unifying factors would be a sense of grievance or playing off of emotions as a reason why people can radicalize themselves to the most extreme versions of a way of thought. So a lot of extremist ideologies are kind of rooted in grievance, the idea that a shadowy group of others is coming to take something from you, or they already have stolen something. And that is an extremely motivating emotion for a lot of people. The idea that I had something that was rightfully mine and it was taken from me can lead people through a process of feeling as if extreme behavior is justified. So if you look at the militia movement, the idea that there is a group of people in the anti-government sphere that feel as if the US government oversteps its bounds, that the Constitution is being threatened. We see them rallying around the idea of gun control. To them, the grievance is their rights, their status as a patriot, and that can lead people to action. And it's similar with white supremacists. The idea that there is this status, that there is the idea of a white genocide or this growing tide of color is coming to uproot that status, that makes people feel as if something that is theirs is under attack.
Grieving the loss of status can be extremely animating, and what is so tricky about status is it's not necessarily linked to wealth, which can make changes in status harder to quantify. The idea that whiteness and white supremacy are not as powerful as they once were earlier in America's life is extremely concerning for these groups. This echoes something that Chris said when he made the point.
You know, the real precondition for a person getting involved in this, they have to have a feeling of grievance and shared grievance, you know, that something has happened to them that is beyond their control and is wrong. And in the white supremacist, white nationalist community, it's pretty easy to sort of see how they would feel that they were being wronged in a way that they felt like their supposed, you know, rightful grip on power was being taken away from them. You know, it's what's animated the extreme fringe and the white supremacist movements for decades.
Okay, so let's get real. What are some actual extremist groups, and what are they doing? I asked Chris what, if any, extremist groups are actually here in Georgia.
There are quite a number, for instance, of paramilitary groups that would be classified as extremist groups by a number of watchdogs. These are generally called sort of in the catch-all category of militias. So, I mean, that sort of characterizes the extremist landscape a lot in Georgia, is the militia movement. But we have other groups as well. There are some radical, generally small sets of white supremacist groups and accelerationist groups. Now, accelerationist groups are groups that are sort of characterized by their desire to bring about a violent end to the American way of life, the American system, out of which they would have a white supremacist or white dominated authoritarian government that would rise up out of it. So we have groups like that. As I said, those kind of, you know, domestic violent extremist groups tend to be small. Yeah. Sometimes they don't operate very much in the real world. They're operating online a lot, or when they do operate in the real world here in Georgia, we see them often doing some sort of low impact kind of things like putting up flyers or leaflets or those kind of things. But occasionally we see them break out into the real world. And sometimes we see them, as we saw about a year and a half ago, be broken up by federal and state authorities. There was a group in Rome called the Base. And they were part of a large national organization of violent extremists on the extreme right, and they were plotting an alleged assassination. So, there are those kind of things that happen as well.
Understanding how far these groups are willing to go and how they're organized can be difficult. Like Chris said, most of the time they have small numbers and are doing relatively low impact things. And that's the problem. Their actions are small and low impact until they're not. So all we have is online chatter and major inflection points to truly teach us about these groups. The example that Chris brought up can do just that. In June of 2020, state and federal authorities arrested 3 Georgia men and accused them of 1, plotting to murder a Bartow County couple, and 2, belonging to a criminal gang. These men were accused of belonging to a, quote, accelerationist extremist group called The Base. This group advocates for violent acts as a way to speed up the collapse of society, allowing them and other white supremacists to build a white ethno-state out of the debris of our former society. There will be a link in the description to a full AJC story if you want to read more about that. Moreover, when it comes to perpetrating real-world violence, we don't need to look any further than January 6th and Charlottesville. I asked Chris what are some of the similarities and differences between those two events.
America looked at that and sort of, was repulsed by what they saw. And what the extreme right thought was going to be a victory for them in Charlottesville actually turned out to be a terrible defeat. It caused a lot of dislocation and disruption in that landscape. You had organizations that were sued, people that were arrested. You had organizations sort of collapse under their own weight. These sort of fragile alliances that were formed between groups split apart, as they almost always do. And then you had a period of sort of retrenchment in the far right as they sort of regrouped and new groups formed. That's where you got a lot of these really violent, smaller groups that formed out of the wake of Charlottesville. January 6th didn't involve organizations as much and involved a lot of people who are more just, very conservative or very more specifically pro Donald Trump. That's it was a rally that became a riot. In that riot, they really saw it as a really important flexing of their muscle again. People saying this is a 1776 moment. This is a revolution. Things will never be the same after this. In the wake of it, you see, similar to Charlottesville, there are 500 arrests thereabouts now. You've seen organizations collapsing under the weight. The Proud Boys are really under a lot of stress right now, as a good example. So in that sense, it's sort of similar to Charlottesville in that what they thought was going to be this massive victory has really turned out to be very dislocating and disruptive to that far right environment.
But since these events, far-right extremist groups have gotten weaker, and faced with the reality that they're not the tip of the revolutionary spear, the movement has fractured.
What you saw in Charlottesville, what you saw on January 6th was an alliance of revolutionary ideologues collapse.
Yeah.
And that is always going to happen, is that, when revolutionary ideologues get together with other revolutionary ideologues, they fight with each other as much as they fight with anybody else. And you've seen, particularly say in the militia landscape, but also the Proud Boys, which is sort of a militia in itself, so much divisiveness internally since January 6th, so much splitting, groups falling apart and reforming, that it just shows that, these groups, they get together, they make a push, and it falls apart, and they have a really hard time getting back up off the deck. That's, people who are, way out on the fringes of society politically, they have a hard time getting along with other people.
Yeah.
Even people who you think they share a lot of interests with. Sometimes those are the people that fight with the most. So,
which brings us to the question I would like to pass off to you. What do you see as the future of radicalization? Also, this is not just me talking to a camera and you guys listen to it. This is a conversation. So I would like to know your opinion on anything and everything I said in that comment section down below. And hey, while you're down there leaving your carefully worded and respectful comments, go ahead and press that subscribe button if you haven't already. Press the like button if you liked this video. Favorite if you really liked it. But as always, my name is Joseph and this is the Atlanta Journal-Constitution in Context.